History has been decorated with a colorful assortment of men and women that were so far ahead of their time and paradigm that they were called outcasts and charlatans, only to now be called mavericks and trailblazers. Men and women like Sir Francis Bacon, Helena Blavatsky, Percy Fawcett, and Manly P. Hall, just to name a few. People that now we look at with reverence, but at the time, people looked at with disdain, called them pseudoscientists and a range of other things. Imagine if the pioneers and freethinkers of our time had a place to assemble and put their wanderings, ponderings, and thoughts all in one cohesive place. Well, now we do. Introducing Pharos, a brand new publication by the Institute for Natural Philosophy. This magazine aims to provide an alternative offering for those enraptured by our history, cosmos, and our place in it all. The first issue is over 200 pages and features many articles, columns, and exposés on some of our universe's most fascinating concepts. And the magazine is as much of a treat for your eyes as it is for your mind, with every page beautifully and expertly designed to accentuate the entire experience. The digital download is available now for free at the Institute for Natural Philosophy's website, and a physical copy will be available for purchase soon. Link in the description below. Stay tuned and stay curious, my friends.
Hello and welcome to another special guest episode on the Institute for Natural Philosophy. Tonight we have Ralph Elis with us, which are very appreciative for he accepted our invitation. But I will leave the introductions to my co-host tonight, that is Cody McDonald. Good evening, Cody.
Good evening, Ricardo. I appreciate getting to be on here, and welcome, Ralph. That we're flattered to get to have you. You've been an incredible voice in the alternative, free thinking community for well over 30 years, and your books, your talks, your lectures, they as your line is called, they're very illuminating. And we thank you for that, and we're very pleased to get to have you on here today. So thank you, sir.
Yeah, real honor.
My pleasure. Yeah, thanks, Ricardo and Cody, for having me on. And hopefully it'll be an interesting little talk.
Absolutely. We hope so. Just so that some people might not know who you are, could you give just a small presentation of who you are and your work, and then we'll dive into any subject. You can even link it together as you will.
Yes. Well, I've got a diverse history. I'm a bit of a polymath. I started in mineral surveying. I went on to coding for computers. I was a computer analyst. Then I went into aviation, became an airline captain flying the big jets. And I'm a climate scientist as well. And I've written a very influential paper on climate, well, paleoclimate, climate of the past. And then in between time, when I wasn't doing very much, I wrote 14 books on. Well, I get a lot of time off. The problem was with my flying is I was on the bottom rungs, you might say, of flying, and so they tended to lay us off every winter when they don't want pilots, so we're expendable. And so I had the winter off on many occasions, and so I wrote books, and I did a whole long series on the re-evaluation of the Old and New Testaments from a historical perspective, from a Gnostic atheist perspective, which was very productive. So I think I found most of the Bible story from Old to New Testament in the historical record, and it's very similar to the standard narrative, except that the people are much more wealthy and aristocratic and royal than they tend to make out in the gospel sort of stories. So we can go through that at another time. That's all very interesting. But I wrote 2 books as well, which we're going to look at here on the pyramids and henges and the megaliths and all of that sort of business. In a way, that got me into this. I was writing about pyramids and henges before I got into the biblical work, because there are many mysteries to be seen there, and I thought I had a different perspective on this, and it's still very different. So all of the information you'll see here, all of our viewers and listeners, is all very new, even though I wrote about this nearly 30 years ago now. But it's still fresh and new because these books are not widely known. I don't know why they didn't take off in the way that I thought they would, because they are very interesting and the data is very interesting. So, and we've got a whole new generation of people, because this is 30 years ago. We've got a new generation of people here who have not seen this information. So that's interesting. They will never have heard of this. So this will be a good opportunity to put this out to the new generation. So yeah, so that's me. That's what I'm doing. I don't know if should I move on into the mathematics of the pyramids?
Yes, tell us about that.
Well, let's do a quick share. I normally share windows, so hopefully that will come up as a share.
We can see it.
There we go. So you should see three. What's it saying here? To avoid an infinity mirror, don't share your entire screen. Okay, I'm not doing that. Yeah, you should see three pyramids. So that's coming up okay, is it?
Looks perfect on my end.
Yeah, yeah, perfect.
Good, excellent. So that's the Giza pyramids. Everyone will know what they are. That's fine. These are just some pictures to set the scene. This is obviously the Sphinx and the second pyramid. And this comes from my book, Thoth, Architect of the Universe. And that was backed up by the sequel, which is K2, Quest of the Gods, which we might get in today, because that K2 is a little bit esoteric, you might say. It goes out on a limb.
It's somehow related to the K2 mountain, or
yes, yes. The K2 mountain is a pyramid, so that's why it gets a mention. And it's all very interesting, but very esoteric, very problematic, because it's a weird story. But it all comes from actual data. So all I did was I put it down and say, look, here's the information. Make of it what you will, because these pyramids are mathematical, and not enough is made of this in the standard literature. I do hate the standard literature that quotes all of the pyramids in feet or meters. They were not built in feet or meters. They were built in cubits, and you cannot understand the pyramids unless you actually look at them in their original units. So the first thing we're going to look at is the Great Pyramid. I don't know whether people know this.
Sorry, which cubit do you use?
The royal cubit.
The royal cubit, okay.
Yeah, or most of these pyramids were made in royal cubits, not the common cubit, but the royal cubit, which is 7 hands instead of 6 hands. So the number 7 crops up all the time. You'll see it here in the radius of a circle, 7. 22 over 7 is the fractional equivalent of pi. 22 over 7. That's where the 7 comes from in the royal cubit. Because the pyramid is the same. If we took the pyramid to its essential numbers, the height is 7, the perimeter is 44, or 2 times 22. So, and pi is 22 over 7. So the pyramid is 2 times pi.
And how do you get to those numbers?
We will look at that in 1 minute.
Thank you.
But 2 times pi, of course, is a circle. A circle is 2 pi r, the perimeter of a circle. That's why you have to double the 22 to get number 44. That's what you do in a circle. The radius is 7, therefore the perimeter is 44. And the same happens with the pyramid. The height is 7, the perimeter is 44. So let's look at the actual numbers.
Is this related to the squaring of the circle?
Sort of, yes, because the pyramid base is a square. It's a circle squared. So if you have a circle, well, the base of a pyramid is a square, but it is the same as a circle.
Exactly.
So it's a circle squared.
And Ralph,
very, very Masonic, yeah.
for for context, around what dynasty did they start using the royal cubit, or what year?
Well, that is a good question, because my argument is that this royal cubit was made for the pyramid complex. It is not a pre-existing unit that they used. This unit of measure was made for the Giza pyramids. So the Giza pyramids and the units were one big project altogether.
Okay, and some of that, the royal cubit shows in the precision vases, right?
Yes, it does. But so
Okay.
that has an effect as well, because it means that any artifact that you find that uses the royal cubit or the royal finger must post-date the pyramids.
Okay.
So if you find something like at Saqqara, which is supposed to be older, if you find something at Saqqara that's using the royal cubit, that must post-date the Giza pyramids, because I believe the royal cubit was made for these pyramids, because it's one big project, and we'll see why in a minute. So this is the pyramid. This is the Great Pyramid. On the left is pi. Pi is 22/7. So one base is half of that, 11/7. And pi up here, just as a reminder, is 22/7. Shall I make my cursor a little bit bigger just to make it more visible?
Or if you can, I'm seeing it, but if you can, it might be easier for. Yeah, that's good.
Yep, I shall. Hold on. I'm just going to system preferences. Cursor size, I'll make it a wee bit bigger. There we go. So now it's a little bit bigger. So this is pi on the left side. It's a pyramidal representation of pi. If we multiply by 40, then we get the Great Pyramid, because the Great Pyramid is 280 cubits high. Here it is on the right side, 280 high, 440 along the base. It's a simple 40 times copy of pi, and then multiply by 2, because it's a circle, and a circle is 2 pi r. And that is interesting, because this gives us a very good clue, because this is where my megaliths and my Old Testament work all sort of coincide. Because how did the Israelites lose their sacred mountain?
Yeah, that's.
I mean, they wrote about everything. They knew everything. Everything is recorded. So how did they lose Mount Sinai? Well, they didn't. If you look at the descriptions of Mount Sinai, it lies on the edge of a desert. It's the tallest mountain in the region, but it's small enough that you can cordon off. You can put a fence around it, because you weren't allowed to touch it. If you touched it, that was a death sentence. It had a cave inside it where God lived. It was sharp and difficult to climb. What else about it? Oh, it had fire on the top of it and things of this nature. Well, of course, they didn't lose their sacred mountain. They just don't want you to know what it is. It is the Great Pyramid. So Mount Sinai is the Great Pyramid of Giza, because it is on the edge of a desert. It is the tallest pyramid in the region. It is small enough that you can put a fence around it to cordon it off. It does have a cave inside it. You could climb up to it. We have evidence for that, and go down into the cave. The cave at the bottom of the Great Pyramid was always open. Strabo talks about it. So we know it was open back in the pre-Roman sort of era. And yes, you could put a fire on the top of it, because it always had a platform on the top of it.
Well, and we see the number 40 appear quite a bit in the Bible, coded in there. So that would make quite a bit of sense.
That's why they had 40 years in the desert, in the wilderness, because it was a symbol of initiation into the Giza pyramids. So if you wanted to say to people down through the millennia that you had been initiated into the Giza mysteries, you made your reign length 40, or your life was 40, or you had 40 years in the wilderness, or you had, like Jesus did, 40 days and nights in the wilderness. It was an easy way of saying that you're being initiated into the mathematics of the Giza pyramids, because the Great Pyramid is a 40 times copy of pi.
So once more, coincidence takes planning.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is.
And so, yeah, this is where both sides of my research collide, and that happens quite a lot. Actually, that happens quite a lot.
Could you give me a further description of the characteristics? Because I'm fascinated by what you said in regards to the pyramid. Is there any more description
Of Mount Sinai?
Yes.
Off the top of my head, I can't think about it. They were retreating from Middle Egypt at the time, so they were passing by the Giza region.
Very jagged, right?
Yes, so it wasn't over in the Sinai Peninsula like they keep saying. They were retreating from Middle Egypt at the time. The other thing is that the Old Testament talks about them perambulating the mountains. So the Israelites used to circle the mountains.
Yes.
And it's not entirely clear what that is meaning. But of course, if you look over to the Kaaba in Mecca, you can see exactly what it means.
That's what I thought. Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I thought immediately.
They circle the Kaaba. And what are they doing? Well, don't tell any Muslims this because they'll have a fit. But what they are doing, if you look at it from above, is they are recreating the circling of the stars around the celestial pole. So if you get a long exposure photo of the stars looking at the celestial pole, you'll see this great ring of stars going around the celestial pole. Well, you look at Mecca and see the faithful going around and around the Kaaba. They're all individual stars. They're recreating the movements of the heavens. As above, so below. You know the quote well. And that's what they were recreating. It's a very old thing that they used to do. And as an aside, I haven't got the pictures here, but anyway, that circling came from Mecca. Not Mecca that we know now, because Mecca is not called Mecca, it's called Mecca in the Arabic. But the original Mecca is Mecca in Marib, down in what's called modern Yemen. The Sabaeans used to live in Marib, and they built the Marib Dam, which was the biggest dam in the world for thousands of years. It's a huge, great construction. But the temple next door to the Marib Dam is the temple of Al-Makkah. And Makkah is the Queen of Sheba. This is why they were known as Sabaeans. And the temple of Al-Makkah is a circling temple. It's exactly the same as Mecca in modern Arabia today, that they do the circling. So it's quite obvious to me that the original circling rituals and the original, as it were, Islam came from Mecca in Yemen, down at Marib. Because at that time, when Muhammad was making his new Quran, the Sabaeans were fleeing from Marib because their dam had broken, and they were starving because obviously it was the center of their agriculture. And Muhammad actually mentions that the Sabaeans were fleeing out of Marib in the Quran. It's actually in the Quran. And I think he took all of the old manuscripts from the Sabaeans, because the Sabaeans were Jews. They were a pseudo-Jewish community down in Yemen.
Yeah, and reconfigured it to his own culture.
Yeah, and that's why the Quran is a corruption of the sort of Old Testament. But a slightly different view of the Old Testament. It's slightly different stories.
Yes.
But that would suit the people from Marib, because they had been separated from Judaism for hundreds of years. So yeah, of course their texts would have been slightly different.
Sure. I think they serve the same purpose that Christianization did, that is to end all forms of paganism. So all the culture that was then based and regulated by the jinns from the people of the desert and so on, all of that is criticized and appears often in the Quran as saying you have to leave those beliefs. So it's not that different from it's a cultural reconfiguration in large scale and unifying people in that regard. So and taking their beliefs and taking their ancient beliefs.
Yeah, and the original Sabaeanism, I don't like the term paganism. They were more Sabaeans. Sabaeanism is the study of the stars. So they were astrologers. They were astrologer priests.
When I mean pagan, I mean in the late sense of the word. So I don't know if late is an English word, but it's broader sense. That's what I mean.
Yeah. In English, it tends to mean a rustic religion. About animal worship and things of this nature.
Animism, all of that included.
But it was more to do with astronomy and astrology, and they studied the stars. Because Saba in Egyptian means star, so they were star worshippers. But just going back to the metrology of the Great Pyramid, we still use, well, we don't, but Americans do, the same units today. So we saw before that the base length of the Great Pyramid was 440 cubits. Well, you've got 4 sides to a pyramid, so the total length of the pyramid is 1,760 royal cubits. And, well, unless you're in America or me being British, because we used to have imperial units in Britain when I was growing up, the imperial mile is 1,760 yards. It's exactly the same. And that is not a coincidence, because we inherited the Egyptian measurement system from the pyramids, because it is a pi-based system. So it looks random, doesn't it? 1,760. Why on earth would you want such a stupid thing? Well, it's because it's a 40 times copy of pi. Pi is 22/7, and you multiply that up, and you'll see that you get to 1,760. So start at the bottom with the cubit. You've got 1 cubit. The rod is 5.5, as it is in the imperial rod is 5.5. Why would you want a fractional unit? If you're making a unit length to use, why would you want fractions? Well, because it's a pi system. Because the chain is 22, that's 22/7 is pi. And a quarter of that is 5.5. That's where the 5.5 rod came from. And they had the same in Egypt as we do in the imperial system. So 22 yards or cubits is the chain. The furlong is 10 times that, or 220. And if you multiply up again, by another 8, you get 1,760, and that is the imperial mile, or the royal mile for the pyramids. Now the total length is different, because the yard is not the same as a cubit, but we've kept the ratios, even though the actual length is different. And so both of these are pi-based units. And that's why we get these strange and stupid figures like 5.5 and 220 for a furlong. Anyone who's into horse racing, all horse racing is done in furlongs. Anyone who plays cricket pitch is 1 chain. Rod lengths, we still use these measurement systems today, even though you probably don't know about them. And everyone knows.
It's interesting America carried that on. There's a lot of interesting cultural ties in our country's foundation and everything that really fascinate me, that kind of link directly back to ancient Egypt, and this being one of them.
Well, that's because it's Masonic, you see. The Masons are still abide by a lot of this because it's part of their code and tradition, and the imperial measures are part of that. So yes,
I think all this relates to sacred geometry. I think
yes, very much, and that is to do with masonry as well.
Exactly.
Although a lot of Masons today, I'm not sure about America, have forgotten about this. I used to teach this to Masonic lodges. And of course, a lot of people in lodges don't know any of this today. So it's not widely known within Masonry.
Well, lodges are not what they used to be.
No. Well, yes, I'm not a member of Grand Lodge in London, so that's, yeah. I don't know what they know in Grand Lodge, although one of our past masters in our lodge had been through the chair at Grand Lodge in London, but he didn't know anything about this either. So I don't know what they do know and don't know. I'm only a lowly pleb, so.
Look, Richard Ogland has an expression that I stolen from him. That is, the lie is different at every level.
Yes,
So,
I can imagine.
so is the truth. So
I can imagine, yes. What have we got here? I must have this for a reason. So this is just the Great Pyramid again, just saying how the units we use, remember the height of the pyramid is 280 cubits. And that's where we get the finger system from as well, because remember the royal finger is 28 fingers to the cubit. So they've used that because it's not obvious why the cubit should be divided up into 28 fingers. But now we sort of know, because the height of the pyramid is 280 cubits, and they've taken that because it's a pi figure. It's a multiple of 7, of course. 7 multiplied by 40, and you've got your 280.
Do you think this is in any kind related to the fact that they use binary mathematics instead of a scale of 10 as we do?
Well, they didn't use 10. They're using pi here, but I don't think they use binary as such. But it's worth noting that this is the Israelite cubit as well. It says in the Old Testament that the cubit that they were using, this is, for the tabernacle and for the Ark of the Covenant, was a cubit and a handbreadth. And that's very specific, because only the royal cubit is a cubit and a handbreadth.
Sure.
Because the standard cubit is 6 hands, but the royal cubit was 7. So it was a cubit and a handbreadth. So we know that the Israelites were using the royal cubit of Egypt. And that's interesting, because the temple they made in Fortress Diwa, which we'll talk about when we come on to my religious reevaluations, the temple they made there was in Egyptian royal cubits. And it was very odd that they would be building in Britain using the Egyptian cubit. So we'll come on to that later. So that's an interesting thing.
Sure.
So
would you
sorry,
allow
any other
me?
questions? Yep.
Would you allow me to show you just a small clip, just to see if it makes sense of what I was saying? Because I don't think I expressed myself in terms of when I sought the binary. I just want to show you a small clip. So I'm just going to take the presentation for a second. I hope you can hear it. I'm not sure if the sound will come out, but we'll find out. So it's better to do the entire screen so I don't have any problems. Oh, you have to stop your share if you can. Just skip the slide, and then you just have to share it again.
Yep.
Okay. Now I can do it. Entire screen, share. Let me get out of here. And it's supposed to be here. Is already playing? No, it isn't. Just a second. Can you see it?
Yes, I can see.
Can you hear it?
No, I can't hear him. No.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to how he does the section. So what he's saying here is that to the Egyptians, the number 472, for instance, is 4 100s, 7 10s, and 2 1s.
Mhm.
instead of being 472. And then he shows how they use mathematics. And I'm not sure if this is going to work without sound. Let me move to the actual mathematics. Okay, let me put on play here and see if I can guide you through it. Just a second. So he is describing here the powers of 2. That's what I was trying to convey to you.
Mm.
How they do mathematics. So these keep doubling the number. And he says that any number can be represented by these numbers. So he's doing the number 17 is 16 plus 1. So in order to do a calculation, you see 17 versus 25. What he does is just a second. So 17 versus 25 is the 16 in the 1. You put the 25, then 50, 100, 200, 400. And to get the result, you just have to circle the ones that are in that size. And you get 425.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. That's a good way of calculating. I've not seen it done like that before. I've
That's
seen
cool.
them. I've seen them do weights and measures where they divide the weights and measures into 8ths and 16ths and 32ths, exactly the same, going down the smaller and smaller measures. They divide it up in the same fashion as that. In the other one, if you're interested in that, the best one to look at is the Rind mathematical papyrus, which I have a copy. I think it's downstairs actually, which is a very old mathematical document from about 1600, 1700 BC, so 3,700 years ago, where they are giving mathematical problems for students. And I have to say, they are pretty tricky. And they're calculating areas of pyramids and so on. You know, given a pyramid of this base length and this height, what's the area of the face of the pyramid? And you think, well, that's quite complex stuff. Yeah. So very interesting. That's the Rind mathematical papyrus. Okay. It's in London at present.
It's almost trigonometry.
Oh, it is. Yes, it's full of trigonometry. They certainly knew trigonometry.
Okay.
They certainly knew that. That's for sure. And we'll see that they did as we go on to Dashur, which is.
Sure, please carry on. I'm sorry for the interruption. I
right.
just thought you would find interesting that.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting that comes out with the right result, because that's an interesting way of doing it, isn't it? It's
no timetable, no need to memorize anything.
We don't need to do maths in the same way that we do at present. So this is the Red Pyramid, and this shows that they understood trigonometry very well. This is the Red Pyramid. These are Dashur, and this is the Bent Pyramid. And the Bent Pyramid is interesting because they say that this bend in the pyramid is because they were going to build a much sharper pyramid, but they found some cracks in it or whatever, and they wanted to relieve the pressure, so they made a lesser slope on the top of it.
Yeah, like they made an accident in the
design.
It
was an accident. Yeah, no, they don't make accidents. No,
Master Smiths, no big deal.
No, tell me one building that they messed up and they kept building with it messed up. There's not a single one.
Well, and the engineering feat of accurately engineering off of a mistake isn't in itself as impressive as engineering correctly in the first place. It's like doing two projects for one.
But I can demonstrate that this is not a mistake. So this is interesting. And again, this is not in any textbook, and yet it's pretty obvious. If we look at these two from cross-section, so we've got the red pyramid on the left. I called it the Draco pyramid because they're pointing at stars. But anyway, red pyramid on the left, bent pyramid on the right. They are actually pretty much the same, because they're the same height. They're both 200 cubits high. So we end up with the red pyramid having the same angle at the top as the red pyramid does. So they are almost identical, except the bent pyramid has had the bottom sides trimmed off a little bit. Otherwise, they are very, very similar.
So,
but if we look...
Can we say that it's not the top that is banded, but the bottom?
Possibly, yes. Yeah. Although, yes and no. So, what actually happens is that the red pyramid is a Pythagorean pyramid. So I presume your listeners will be familiar with Pythagoras. We have certain triangles which have whole numbers on each side, like the 3, 4, 5 pyramid. Triangle is a Pythagorean triangle. Well, this one is a 20, 21, 29, which is a Pythagorean triangle. And you can see it here in the units. Just divide by 10. We've got 20, 21, 29 for the sides and the vertical height of the red pyramid. It is a Pythagorean pyramid, which shows that they understood the what is it? It's Euclid's 47th, isn't it?
Exactly.
Which so they knew how to calculate these very special triangles, because there aren't very many of these special triangles where all 3 sides are whole numbers, and this is one of them. But if we go to the bent pyramid, it's not, and that was very unsatisfactory to me. So I wanted to see why this was not Pythagorean. And yet they are linked because they have the same angle at the top. So let's look at the bent pyramid in cubits, and you see here at the top we end up with a height of 110, a width of 115.5, and a slope angle of 159.5 in cubits. And that's all very messy, isn't it? It doesn't make any mathematical sense. But of course, that wasn't the only unit that they were using, because we've already seen that they have the royal rod as well as the royal cubit. So perhaps they were using royal cubit, the royal rods, which measures 5.5 cubits. Well, let's measure this bent pyramid in rods instead. And that simplifies things much better. So we get a height of 20, a width of 21, and a slope angle of 29. It's a 20, 21, 29 Pythagorean triangle, but only when measured in rods. So the top of the bent pyramid is a copy of the red pyramid next door, but shrunk on a scale of 10 to 5.5. They've just shrunk down the red pyramid, plonked it on top of the bent pyramid, and that's what we see on the top. And it's just measured in rods instead of cubits. 20, 21, 29. So the
different ages, different purposes.
Well, it links the two, doesn't it? They are part and parcel of the same diagram from the same designer's drawing board.
Same lineage, it seems, definitely.
Absolutely. Now, I'm saying, because obviously we don't know why they've done this, I'm saying that they are linking them into the cosmos above, because you remember the Giza pyramids are linked like the belt of Orion.
Yes,
I think
the
everybody knows that.
Yes.
So they're 3 stars together. well, perhaps the Dashur pyramids are stars, but I said, no, they are not stars. I think they are points in space. I think they are the ecliptic pole and the celestial pole. And to denote, I should say, that they are both poles, they both have the same Pythagorean triangle on the top. They are both poles, but they're different poles. One is the celestial and one is the ecliptic pole, about which, the cosmos rotates if you look at it.
Is the difference between the two of them anyhow related, if you look at it, anyhow related with the fact that the Earth is not a perfect sphere? Is that difference the same difference between a perfect sphere and the actual circle of the Earth?
I don't think so, but we will see that when we come on to Avebury later, but I don't see that in this particular diagram. I mean, we don't really know exactly why they did this, but clearly these two pyramids are closely linked together at Dashur. And my speculation was that they're just talking about the poles, the axes of the cosmos, which used to be known. I mean, they knew about these axes. It was known as the cosmic cart in Greek literature, in Greek ancient traditions, because if you look at them in the heavens, they look like two wheels in the heavens above, rotating around each other, as though there's a cosmic cart in the heavens above. So they knew about these wheels and how they rotated and the precession of the equinox and all of that sort of business. So it's interesting that these are very mathematical pyramids. We've seen, for the Great Pyramid, we've seen pi and the circle and squaring the circle. For Dashur, we've seen Pythagoras and how they've used those, and very difficult Pythagorean triangles. This is not a 3, 4, 5 triangle. This is a 20, 21, 29. That's a very difficult one to guess. And now when we look at the second pyramid, we will also see Pythagorean triangles. So let's run back to the second pyramid at Giza. And this one is very interesting. This is very technical, this one. This is the chamber underneath the second pyramid. And it's 27 cubits long and 9.5 and a bit cubits wide. And for a long time, I kept thinking it's got to be 9.5, isn't it, in cubits? But I went there and I measured it, and it's not. It's 9.5 and a bit. It's 9.55. You think, wow, what a stupid figure. Why are they using that figure? I mean, the height
is one a royal cubit and the other one a royal rod?
No, because the rod is 5.5, so you'd be looking at 11, which is what they use in the Queen's chamber. They use the number 11, which is obviously a rod length. But here they're not. And so I fooled around with the numbers for a long time, and I suddenly realized that if you take the ground plan of this chamber, 27. So we can actually do this. So 27 squared plus 9.55, call it, squared, square root, we get 28.638. Which is the diagonal, of course. I've got it marked on there, which is the diagonal. Divide it by 3. Oh, I didn't do that. What did I do there? Stupid boy. So 27 squared plus 9.55 squared equals square root 28 divide by 3 equals 9.546. So a third of the diagonal equals the width of the pyramid, width of the chamber. So there's a direct linkage here between the diagonal and the width. So
a scale, perhaps?
Yeah, diagonal divided by 3 equals the width. And there's not many rectangles will do that. That is pretty specific. That's not coincidence. Someone has chosen those figures because there are only a few proportions of chamber that will actually do that.
Yeah.
So that is a conscious choice by the designer to show, hey, aren't I great? You know, I can do this complex mathematics. Why don't you look at me and see what else I can do? These are just invitations, aren't they? You know, anyone with a mathematical bent will go, oh, that's interesting. What else did this guy do?
I wonder.
Girl. You've got to say girl now as well.
It had to do with that to some degree.
Sorry, say again?
I wonder if the angles on the bent pyramid had to do with that to some degree, that there's an encoding there that we just don't quite have the key to.
Yes.
That tells its own story.
I'm sure there is, you know, that might give you the reason why the bend is there. You know, we've seen some indication of why the bend is there, but it might give you, it might link up with something in the cosmos or something, you know, in astronomy or something. Who knows? Yeah. Someone else needs to have a deeper look at that.
Are you familiarized with the type of chambers in, for instance, in Ireland, of barrows, and are you familiarized with that? So it's the 4/3. They use the 4/3 harmonic scale, so the rooms are exactly sized to work in a 4/3 scale, and that also functions with the sound frequencies. So the frequencies inside the structure would also multiply by that 4/3. So I was wondering if here that number that you get, that difference, is not an harmonic scale, that is a third.
Well, I would like someone who has perhaps a musical bent, which I do not have, or a mathematical bent, which I have a fairly modest understanding of mathematics. But if you know, we could actually interest someone who was into mathematics, they might find some more interesting coincidences here. They might recognize these numbers as being special in some fashion, which I don't know. So yes, I'd like as many people to look at this as possible, because quite obviously this designer was playing around with numbers. And so a modern mathematician might be very interested in some of this, because the second thing we can see, on the left, we've got the chamber, which we've already seen. But if we get this 27 cubit length of this chamber and chop it up into 4 and put those 4 pieces round into a square, so a quarter of 27 is 6.75. So we end up with 4 6.75s, making a nice square. The diagonal of that square
will be the height.
No, it's the width of the chamber.
No,
9.5.
Yes, the width. Sorry, I said height because I'm seeing in
yes,
3D.
You're looking at it as a height. Yeah. It comes to the same figure. It comes to the width of the chamber. Now, how many lengths of a chamber, if you chop it up into 4 and circle it around, equal the width of the chamber? Again, that has been specifically chosen for a particular reason. And on this occasion, I know why they did it, which is interesting. It shows how you can take this further. If you look at this mathematics and have an understanding of it, you can take it one step further, which we can do. So if we look at the second pyramid.
Sorry. So you did get the 4/3.
Well, yes, I don't.
Because you can fit 4 of those squares.
Yes.
Inside the other one, and we just seen that the other one
yes, you would.
it's in the third scale. So you just find the 4 thirds inside
Yes, you
another
could get
megalithic
1,
structure.
2, 3, 4 squares in that in that chamber. Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of ways you could explore this.
Wow.
That's an interesting one. You should have a look at that and see what you get from it.
I'm terrible at mathematics.
But if we look at the cross section of the second pyramid, we get untidy numbers, and I hate untidy numbers. So the actual dimensions are 274 cubits by 411, and you think, oh, what's all that about? That doesn't make any sense. But then I realized that we've got 2 pyramids here. We've got a limestone pyramid, and the bottom is granite. So you could say we've got 2 pyramids. And for a long time, I was very upset about this because I couldn't make head nor tail of it. Because if you look at this pyramid today, if you go there is only 1 layer of granite on the bottom. And it wasn't until I was reading Flinders Petrie, who I've got here somewhere.
Petrie as the old explorer.
Yeah, the
Flinders
temples and pyramids of Giza.
Giza, yeah. I have it in the institute. Yeah,
I like the way he spells Giza. That's the old-fashioned way of spelling it. Anyway, Petrie says there were 2 layers originally. There were 2 layers of granite. Okay, so now that gives me a different calculation to make. And the first thing I found was we get a 3, 4, 5 triangle. So this is the corner of the second pyramid, and these layers were 2 cubits high. So 2 of them makes 4 cubits, and that makes this triangle at the corner a 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triangle. So we've got a nice Pythagorean triangle at the corner, and that fits in with the second pyramid because we know the pyramid, the second pyramid is a 3, 4, 5 triangle. We know that from its basic dimensions. It's just that you cannot see whole numbers within the measurements, and you should be able to. I mean, it's a 3, 4, 5 triangle, but none of these measurements measure 3, 4, 5. So what were they doing? You know, we must have whole numbers somewhere, surely. Well, we do, but only if you realize that the designer has pointed towards a different rod unit. You remember the rod unit we were using in the Great Pyramid was 5.5.
Right.
I think the rod unit here, for no good reason, is 6.75. And that was the rod unit they were using for this second pyramid, because if you use rods of 6.75, we get 3, 4, 5. 30 rods, 40 rods, 50 rods, 3, 4, 5 triangle. So we do get whole numbers for the second pyramid, but only if you realize that they're using a very strange rod length. And I've got no real understanding of why they wanted to change the rod length, but we do get nice whole numbers.
Yeah, perhaps the rod number was not as important, but the result was the 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, but it's odd that the designer is going, okay, here's a very special chamber in the middle of it. It has some mathematical oddities in that chamber. So have a look at this chamber. You look at the chamber, you come out with a figure of 6.75, and then that 6.75 makes the outside of the pyramid resolve into whole numbers. What were they playing around? What was the idea? I mean, we're having fun with mathematics. I mean, that's obvious. The designer is boasting and saying, hey, look, you know, I know all this complex mathematics.
I respect your opinion, but I disagree. I think it's done intentionally for the functionality of the site itself.
Yes, but what does it mean? What is that functionality?
That functionality, from my research, is a combination of all the traits, from the positioning to the materials used for the construction, to the sacred geometry used to structure the design, and the way it's built. Then after that, because that construction is also aligned with the cosmos, so as above, so below, you join, that's archaeoastronomy, then you join archaeoacoustics. And it's when these sites are explored in an archaeoacoustic sense that we see these sites come alive. So when you ask me what purposes can it has, well, I cannot be clear about that, but everything that you told me, that's why I was so interested about the Great Pyramid meeting the description of Mount Sinai. All of that are consequences of sound activation. So I can scientifically justify every single one of those descriptions. So
well, and
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Cody.
I was going to say, if they had the end result of what they were wanting worked out, and they already knew they wanted to go in a 3-4-5 pattern, then they would just have to, work out what that number would be, which it ended up being, what'd you say, 6.7?
Yeah, 6.75. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that may be the consequence of why it's, displeasing portion that we get there, because that was just worked backwards from already knowing the end result and then knowing the pattern they wanted to follow.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
the 3-4-5 is the initial number of the calculation, and then whatever results in the end is the measure that has to be created so that it can be multiplied that same number of times that you have been finding.
But they could have done it with the 5.5 rod. That would be very easy, but for some reason they chose to make it a slightly different size, which resolves into a 6.75 rod. Now, why the difference in unit? Why the difference in size? For some reason, they've made a change here between the Great Pyramid and the Second Pyramid, and I'm not entirely sure why. I've resolved the Great Pyramid. We will look at that in a moment. And I know what that is doing, and it's astronomical and it's cartographical. I'll get it right in a minute. But what the Second Pyramid is doing, I really don't know. It's odd. And I don't know if there is a secondary resolution if we include the granite course at the bottom, of course. What we're doing here is measuring just the limestone. Now, if we measure the whole pyramid, it's 4 cubits longer. So it's like 40.8 rods high, not 40. So yeah, why the two pyramids? Why the granite and the limestone pyramid? I don't understand that. Well, I do understand that. Not mathematically, but I understand it in terms of the representation of these pyramids, because these pyramids are representations of mountains in a mountain range. So,
and you said these measurements were based off the limestone, right?
Yeah.
So I know in the early 1900s, it was pretty common consensus in academia that the limestones were a later addition, and that's possibly why we link it to Khufu and during his reigns. So do you think maybe that the limestone could have potentially been added later, and that's maybe messing with the math that we get?
No, that's the original casing blocks. If you look at the top of the Second Pyramid, has the casing blocks still there, and they measure up perfectly with the sides of the pyramid going down to the bottom here. So they are original, and they're in fine.
You don't think a later dynasty might have renovated and added the casing stones to the granite?
No, that's far too big a job for standard pharaohs. They did do repairs on them. We know that from the Dashur pyramids, which have got repairs all over the place.
So I was thinking that might mess with the math a little bit if, the person way down the line comes through, didn't know what the original intent was of, what was being conveyed mathematically, and then just tried to restore it to, visually, but the code had gotten lost along the way.
I suppose that's possible. No, I think what they were doing is that these pyramids are supposed to be mountains.
Okay.
So the Great Pyramid is the one at the back here on this diagram, and that has no granite at all on that one. So
Okay.
it's pure white. And remember, with its Tura limestone, it would have been pure, bright white.
Yeah.
So it's a mountain covered in snow. The second pyramid is a little bit further down the range, and it's all snow apart from a little snow line at the bottom where it has rocks at the bottom, which is the granite. And then we come to the third pyramid, which is only half snow, limestone, and then the other half is all rocks. It's granite. So it's like we're looking down a mountain range. As we come down the mountain range, obviously the mountains only have snow on the top of them. So we've got a representation here of a mountain range. And the Great Pyramid is at the top of the range, and that's why it's all covered in snow. It's pure white. And I think that's the symbology they were looking for when they made the second pyramid with its small layer of granite on the bottom.
Yeah, I just think it will be hard for people not used to these things to imagine a desert country with snow, imagining snow.
Yes, because, well, we do end up in the snow line. Shall we go there? This is the esoteric bit. Do you want to go?
Oh yeah, let's
Absolutely.
head there.
Just as a final thing on this is very Masonic, of course. The jewel for the past master is the 47th problem of Euclid, which is exactly what we've been talking about. How to measure the angles of a triangle. So it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And that's how you measure these triangles, which is exactly what we've been doing. That's how you decide if something is a Pythagorean triangle, because these will result in whole numbers on the sides. And that's why the past master's jewel is the 47th problem of Euclid. So these things are all still translated.
Yeah. And it still retains the 4/3.
Yeah, in Masonic terms. Yes, I suppose it does. I'll have to think about that. Yes.
I'm finding all this fascinating because I didn't know any of this research, and finding academics have found these 4/3 in so many places, and seeing them represented here, I really wonder what could happen if at the 5th scale, the 5 you're finding, at the 5th scale, we introduce sound in 4/3 notes. What can be achieved? Because, for instance, the Osiris shaft that you should be familiar with, I'm sure. I've had the privilege to have a supercomputer. I introduced all the dimensions to calculate resonance inside the structure, and I found out that is the only autonomous structure that I have researched so far that doesn't need human intervention. It's still active today. It's still working. And the proof of that is that at the bottom, you find pure water. That water has been used for drinking and for baths for at least 300 years from after the site was abandoned. It even was the people that worked at base level on the university that's near Giza, they built a pipe just to extract water from that bottom that is full of woods, full of debris, but the water is completely crystal clear. And I wondered, how is it possible that the water is not contaminated? And that solution to that problem, as I demonstrated scientifically from kind of peer reviewing what I was trying to find out, but it's concise science, is that what is created by the sound frequency, there is a trident of frequencies, so 3 different frequencies combined, and infrasound and hearing level and ultrasound frequencies that are embedded in the structure itself, from the fractures, from the water running beneath it, the channels and so on, is that frequency creates structured water. Structured water was what was known to the ancients as living water. That has almost miraculous capabilities. Is why sometimes certain fountains have gained the fame of healing people, because at that period, because of alignment of or whatever, the energies create that structured water that when we drink it, it can actually heal. It has profound effects on ourselves. So that's the proof that the site is still working. The frequencies are still there, and no one is introducing anything. So I wonder what more can be found. And that, by the way, those frequencies, if you read my paper, they are completely focused on healing. So according to the calculations, a person that was put inside one of those granite boxes, for instance, with a broken leg, instead of taking the time that science now uses with natural medicine, I mean with common medicine, it would reduce the time for 40% for the healing. And this is already being reproduced by modern, not pharmaceutical companies, but research centers for health. So when they introduced this type of structured water in bandages and involved it in the wound, because this structured water permeates our skin like nothing else, it takes all the ingredients of the healing into the point where you are hurt. So they help in the recuperation. So all these systems, I wonder what more can be found if you start using this kind of methodology on this place. That's why I'm fascinated that you showed me again the fifth and the fourth thirds that I keep finding in so many places, not by me, but by academics. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I just...
But we were going to have a look at, I was just going to do Avebury very quickly before going on to the Great Pyramid, just to show that the ancients knew a lot about the cosmos, about the Earth, about the solar system, which, you know, a lot of people don't think they had any knowledge at all. So Avebury proves to me that they did have good knowledge. And this is Avebury. I'm not sure if you've been to Avebury. It's just in Wiltshire.
I've not had the fortune. No.
I didn't have the privilege, no.
It's well worth visiting. It's much better than Stonehenge. So it's only down the road from Stonehenge. And it's a huge, great site. So this is what it looks like. This is from the 18th century. But today it looks more like this. This is my picture. I was flying over it. And it's got a village inside it. That's how big it is, you know. So it's a very large site. And it's interesting because if you want to know the latitude that it's on, all you need to do is down here. It's a 1/7 latitude. So if you get 360 degrees and divide by 7, that is the latitude of Avebury.
Huh.
To the nearest couple of meters.
Wow.
So it's
almost like they had a bird's eye view to plan that out.
It sort of suggests that they knew what the latitudes were of sorry, I've just got a cat that's bothering me.
If you recede the current level of spreading on the place where the continental plates meet, if you retract those centimeters by year, would you get the exact location and determine the year it was made?
That's a good question.
Well, we can look at that in a minute, yes. We can do that via obliquity and precession, but that might be on a separate talk. We will have a look at that. So this is what it looks like from above. And the most important bit is here, which is the Red Lion pub, or bar as you call it in America. So it's quite obvious that that was there first, and then they built the henge around the bar.
You've got to have the pub first.
You've got to have the pub. It's the most important.
Otherwise, how are you going to get the workers there?
Yeah, absolutely. They're not going to come otherwise. But what is this? We've got this. It's like 400 yards, 500 yards across. I mean, it's huge. There's all these houses.
You know how much that is in meters?
Well, a yard is about a meter, so it's about 450 meters across.
Okay. Because it reminds me of the city of Gore.
Oh, I don't know that. Which one?
The ancient city of Gore is exactly with the same rebounds that you see here on the land. So it's an Earth constructed.
Yeah, the ditch and bank. Yes,
exactly. So it's exactly 2 kilometers in diameter.
Okay. Yes.
And appears in the record history by Alexander the Great, because it stands in a massive valley. So Alexander the Great sent first wave, they didn't manage to conquer it. He sent the second wave, he didn't manage to conquer it because the soldiers were going mad, literally mad in the field, in the valley. And so he recognized the technology. This is my point of view, because he was already aware of it. That is, this technology is being exploited by the Russians at certain point, and that is the causation provoked by infrasound. So in the middle of the city, there is a massive tower with an hypogeum room beneath it. And when the correct sounds is introduced to the hypogeum, the tower creates a sphere, a bubble, where anyone that is outside its parameters would get affected by that infrasound. What happens is you have, this is confirmed by today's academics, you have loss of limb control, hallucinations, you're faced with your worst fears, you turn into your peers. So exactly what Alexander the Great describes that happens to his soldiers. So the only way he managed to destroy the area was to break a dam that was protecting the valley, build a dam and flooded the whole valley. So the city was found 600 years later by a sheikh that, using this technology, managed to conquer 2/3 of the territory in about 2 months after he takes hold of this is a Muslim sheikh that managed to conquer 2/3 of the country using this kind of technology. So now that I'm looking at, I know the place, but I never looked at it from this perspective. It's the construction is exactly the same.
Right. Okay. But the question is, what does this look like? What were they building? Was it just a circular temple because it was easy to build? Well, if we look at it rationally, we've got an equator. We've got a big circle, which is like an oblate circle. It's slightly wider across than it is top to bottom. We've got an equator across it, and then we've got a axis going through it. And these gates are original. So these gates at each side, these are original. And the whole circle, as it is presented here, is leaning at 22.5 degrees from due north. So what does that circle look like that leans in that fashion?
The globe.
Yeah, look, it's this. So it's a copy of our Earth, but that is interesting because it rather indicates that Neolithic man, whenever you think these structures were built, understood the form and shape of the Earth, and they were copying it onto the plains of Wiltshire. Because we have the same axis, we have the same equator, we have the same oblate circle or spheroid, leaning at exactly, roughly, is actually 1 degree out, and there's a good reason for that, as the actual Earth itself. And it's the difference between these two angles, because it's not exactly, the current angle of the Earth is not 22.5. So the difference between these two angles will give you a date, and we can look at that later. I'm not sure if I've got the diagrams in this section. So we can actually date Avebury by the angle of obliquity. We call obliquity is the angle of the Earth, and it changes, by 2.5 degrees. It's quite a lot, between about 22.2 and going up to 24.5 degrees. So it does wobble quite a lot over 40,000 years. It's a 40,000 year cycle. So you can use that for dating Avebury, and it gives a very old date.
Yeah, number 4 again. Yeah.
So hunter-gatherers with pounding stones just managed to get all those coincidences correct, huh?
That's right.
What a miracle.
But it gets worse than that, and this is where I go esoteric. But it's all based on the information. The information is here.
We like the esoteric stuff, Ralph.
Well, yeah. Some people get afraid of the esoteric, but anyway, I went there anyway, because, this is the information. Inside these, the big henge, we've got these two small henges, these two small stone circles. And the question is, what are these for? The first one was pretty obvious, because if we look at it, it's got this. Oh, that didn't come out very well, did it? No, never mind. You can still see.
I was expecting it. I was expecting it.
It's got this cove type formation in it. If I take my cross away, it's got a cove inside a circle. And to me, that looked exactly like Stonehenge, which looks exactly the same. Obviously not that big, because that's as big as England and France together, but there we go. Stonehenge is a cove pointing out towards the northeast, surrounded by a circle.
Oh,
and I thought, well,
I imagine that this was the location of the actual Avebury. That's what
well, Stonehenge is just above it, so it's slightly further north than Avebury, very close together. So if we look at it like this, that's probably a better diagram. People can see that better. So we have this cove shape surrounded by 26 stones. 2 times 26 is 52. And of course, Stonehenge sits on the 52 parallel north. So to me, and it's in the northern hemisphere, of course, if this is the Earth, this is in the northern hemisphere.
So what sits in the south hemisphere?
Well, that's the question. That's the question, isn't it? In the southern circle, we get this crescent shape, and surrounded by 29 stones. So what is a crescent shape? 2 times 29 is 58 on the 58 parallel south. And I was looking in South Africa, because there's not many monuments, megalithic monuments down in the southern hemisphere, is there? I mean, you think about it, there's none. You got South America and South Africa, and I don't know any big megalithic monuments in those two regions. So what on earth is it pointing to if this is what it's doing?
Well, there's thousands of them. They are small. They are not at
small.
this scale. They're not at this scale.
They're microliths. So the question is, what on earth is this crescent shape in the southern hemisphere? And then I was playing around with maps, as one does, and I found this, which is the South Sandwich Islands, which is a crescent shape of islands. And if we look at it in better detail, that's what we find. We find a crescent shape. And this cross going through the middle, Montague Island, is the 58 parallel south. Goes right through the middle of that island.
This is like Tomb Raider.
And this is indicating 58 degrees south. And if we look at 58 degrees south, we find this. Now, that is difficult, because that means that Neolithic man is sailing a ship down into the southern hemisphere, and they've got a, what do you use for measuring latitudes? Anyway, they got a sextant or whatever, and they're measuring the latitude.
But the question is, what is so important on that island that we can relate to that?
Well, precisely. What's the point of it? Apart from boasting again, I'm this super intelligent designer, and I know the form and shape of the Earth. I know the angle of obliquity of the Earth. I know the line of latitude of Stonehenge. And now I know the line of latitude of this island down in the South Atlantic. Apart from boasting, what is the point of this?
There's got to be something there, presumably.
Well, they've drawn a map. And why do you want a map?
To get back there.
To draw something on it.
Yeah.
X marks the spot. I mean, that's why we use maps, isn't it? We want to locate something on a map. So what are they locating, and where are they locating it? I mean, The answer from the 1990s, because it was the big rage in the 1990s, was everybody was looking for the Hall of Records, which is a nebulous concept that nobody quite knows where it came from, but someone speculated it was probably one of these old books about the pyramids, you know.
It comes from Sonsis of Sais, the man that originated the legend of Atlantis. So when Solon the Elder,
Solon was the Greek Solon.
Yes, when Solon the Elder visited Egypt in his exile,
yes,
he was received by Sonsis of Sais, and Sonsis of Sais was a master priest in the Temple of Sais, and the Temple of Sais had a Hall of Records. That's what he invites Solon to go and really understand the cycles of the earth and all the cataclysms that happened before. Is where they had all the information recorded. So that's where it originates. It has a sound originates because we know that existed, that the temple is still there and had some underground chambers that could be where the Hall of Records or was for that temple. The misinterpretation is they think there is only one Hall of Records, when I believe that there was many Hall of Records, not only in Egypt, but spread through the world.
Well, I think there's at least two. I think there's one which is pointed to by Avebury, and I think I know where that is, and I've been there. It's down in the South Atlantic. I didn't find anything, obviously, otherwise you'd be reading the book.
you are torturing me, right? I want to know what is on that
breaking news here.
Because I study this a lot, but from a geological point of view, this area. Because to me, most people think it's an impact. I think it's when the waters raised, this is where the land broke out and the waters dragged everything in front of them and created this area here.
Where you can see that this is a tectonic plate. So this is South America here. Sure. This is Antarctica down here.
Yeah.
And this tectonic plate has pushed its way through. This big sort of phallus has pushed its way through. And at the edge of this phallus,
create a crest.
Yeah, there's some uplift, obviously, and it's forced up these islands in this crescent shape. So it's a very strange geological feature. And that's what it looks like. And it's almost like a circle, almost like Avebury itself. Because remember, Avebury is a big circle, which is lined with stones, of course, big megalithic stones in a big circle. If we can see it here, if we go back to Avebury, all around here, you can't, here you can see them down the bottom here.
Exactly.
Is 111, I think, of these big megalithic stones in a big circle. And in essence, you can almost see that here in the islands, a big ring of islands. It's very odd that this fits together so well, that we have this shape of Avebury. And remember, this is the way I didn't discover the South Sandwich Islands and then start looking around in Britain. The way I found this is I found Avebury, I looked at Avebury, I found these latitude markers that I thought they were marking latitudes. And then from that latitude marker, I got a map, because this is in the pre-internet age. You had to go and buy a map. So I had to go down to Stamford's in London, which is the big map shop. And I had to buy a South Atlantic map. And suddenly I found this chain of islands, which I knew nothing about. So it's the megalith that's pointing me in this direction. I'm using the code in the fashion that it was designed, that the designer actually intended. You stupid cat, what are you doing? It's just thrown some books on the floor, never mind.
He's saying, look at this, it's the answer.
And so I've followed the designer's instructions, and I've arrived at a point, except I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to find at this point, because I didn't find anything. But I didn't have the equipment that I would like to have. I would have liked to have had a sort of scanning equipment, you know, for magnetic anomalies or whatever, radar, you know, some more sophisticated way of investigating these structures. But anyway, that's
the sea levels would have been very different at the time of Avery's construction,
well,
right?
only
So-
by 140 meters. So during the ice ages, unless you go back a long, long way, during the ice ages, the sea levels were only 140 meters lower. So yes, the islands would have been bigger, but not by much because they're pretty precipitous. They go up at a fairly sharp angle. So
Okay.
the islands wouldn't have been that much bigger.
I'm not familiar with the geography there, so I was thinking potentially maybe there's a lot more of the island that would have been exposed, cave systems,
Yeah.
whatever, at the time that now
It's
are
pretty deep in between each of the islands. So
Yeah.
I don't think they would join up at all. It's very deep in between them.
And then goes a lot of meters down at the precipice. It is quite a difference. I still defend that, although this is as you described, that water was finally allowed to move when the tectonic plate was moving, and water dragging took half of the circle. You lost your sharing.
Yes, I was just going over to a new share.
And that half of the circle was taken by the water passing through, the rushing of the water.
So you think though that a second Hall of Records might have been located there, or one of the two potentially?
One of the two. So yeah, one of them is an Atlantic one. The second one is this one, which is the Pyramid Hall of Records. So if we go to the Pyramid one,
Just going to get some drink. Just a moment.
we need it. This is the Great Pyramid, and inside the Great Pyramid we have some shafts. And nobody knows what these shafts are for. These shafts are very complicated. Rudolf Gantenbrink, who did the first survey of these shafts, said that putting these shafts into the Great Pyramid doubled the construction time of the pyramid. That's how complicated they are to put inside the pyramid. So if we look at the structure of these shafts, they go up at an angle. So the stones go up at an angle. So we get a bottom stone, which is flat, and then the top stone has the shaft cut out in the top stone, laid on the top of it. But you can't put all of these stones at an angle in a pyramid because they'll just act like a runaway train on a steep slope.
Yeah.
And they'll just all slip straight down into the king's chamber. And you'll end up with a big crash of stones piled into the king's chamber.
So that's how the main sarcophagus was broken. Now we know.
It could have been.
Slid down too high.
So what they did is every, I don't know, fourth or fifth of these blocks, they put a circle block, what he called a girdle block, which was a stone that was tied in to the horizontal stones in the rest of the pyramid. So this was hugely complex to get this little shaft that goes all the way up into the pyramid and seemingly does nothing.
They would have really wanted those shafts to design them.
Really, really wanted these shafts. They were the most important thing in the whole of the pyramid.
And they lead nowhere. The ones they put the machine on, they lead nowhere.
Yeah, they lead nowhere. Two of them led out to the outside world, but from the Queen's chamber, they led nowhere outside and they led nowhere inside either.
Inside, yeah.
Because they didn't even come into the Queen's chamber. They were only found by Wayman Dixon. This is back in the 19th century. And he obviously saw the shafts in the King's chamber because they're obvious. And he thought, well, what about the Queen's chamber? So he was going around the whole of that chamber with a hammer, knocking on the sides of the wall to see if he could hear something. And he heard that it was a little bit hollowish sounding. So he stuck in a piece of wire, and the piece of wire kept on going and going and going. And so he thought, well, we'll open up a hole here. So they opened up a hole and found the shaft. So again, this is a quest. Remember, these chambers were closed off. They were covered up and you could not see them. The only chamber that was open in antiquity was the lower chamber down the bottom of the pyramid, which is not a chamber at all. It's a cavern, as Strabo calls it. He calls it a cavern. So it's obvious that he only knew about the bottom chamber.
It was
the Great
open
Pyramid.
time, you said, right?
Yeah, because he describes the doorway. The doorway had a stone that could be opened.
That's fascinating.
It had a swing stone on the top of it, and you could open it up, which also begs the question as to whether there were steps going up to it. Obviously,
Yeah.
the casing blocks have been taken away, so we can't see if there was or not. But if there was no stairs going up to the normal entrance, then you would have to build scaffolding all the way up to it, because it's quite high.
Yeah.
If you've been there, it's quite a long way off the ground. You'd have to have scaffolding all the way up to this entrance block. But everyone knew where the entrance block was. So I would imagine there were steps going up to it.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of this pyramid is you don't want to conceal the entrance, because everyone knows there's something in the pyramid, and so they'll be digging all over the place in order to find the entrance. The way to keep the pyramid pure and unadulterated is to leave the entrance open.
Just leave the door wide open. Yep.
Leave the door open, and you've got the shaft goes all the way down to the basement, as it were, right to the bottom of the pyramid, which is empty. So anyone who wants to raid this pyramid, all they'll find is an empty chamber at the bottom, the cavern at the bottom. And so what's the point in digging in this pyramid? You know it's empty, so what's the point? And therefore this pyramid can remain unadulterated, untarnished throughout the millennia, because it's empty. But nobody knew there were upper chambers. And nobody knew until Caliph al-Mamun came along and someone found the trial chambers, the trial shafts, which are to the east of the pyramid. And we call it, what did we call it? I did a paper with Mark on this, Mark Foster, because there's a set of passageways that just go into the ground to the east of the pyramid, which are the same as the descending passage in the Great Pyramid.
Huh, at the same angle?
Same angle,
wow.
Exactly the same. But the only difference is it has a shaft that goes upwards, a passageway that goes upwards, a certain number of cubits down this shaft. And so you might think...
Are you referring to the stairs that are sort of near the pyramid that just kind of go nowhere into the ground?
No, it's not stairs. It's an actual shaft. It looks exactly the same as the Great Pyramid shaft or passageway. We called it the, not the trial shaft, but the, or another name for it, because what we think it was for is a demonstration to show you there might be another passageway within the Great Pyramid. If you look at this passageway, which has this upper passageway coming off it, then, well, maybe the Great Pyramid has the same. And all you need to do is measure down the pyramid the exact same number of cubits and knock on the ceiling, and oh, that is a little bit hollow there.
So that esoteric encoding again.
Yeah, so I don't think that the Mamun's tunnel is the way they found the way into the pyramid, because the entrance was always open. We know from Strabo that the entrance was always open. So there was no point hacking your way through the pyramid to make Mamun's forced entrance, which is the entrance you go into now if you visit the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
That's not the way it was found. It was always open. So why did Mamun make this big forced entry? And our idea is it was not because that forced entry goes straight to the join between the descending and the ascending passageways. It's exactly on target. And you think, well, how did they manage that? We said that it wasn't an entrance passageway. It was an exit passageway,
Uh,
because Al-Mamun found this ascending passage. Therefore, he found the queen's chamber and found the king's chamber. And he wanted to get something out of those chambers. But whatever they wanted to get out would not go round the bend from the ascending passage to the descending passage. It's a very acute angle to get around. Whatever it was too long to get around that. So the only way they could get it out was to force an exit out of the pyramid.
straight out.
So it makes
that's
sense.
exactly what they did.
It makes sense to make it vertical as they did, and then
Horizontal, yeah. But we don't know what they got out of the Great Pyramid. They got something out of the Great Pyramid. I suggested it was the lid to the sarcophagus, because the sarcophagus itself would not go out of the door. It's too big to get out of the doorway to the king's chamber. But the lid would get out. I mean, it could be something else, we don't know, but something was too big to get out of the pyramid, and they forced this exit, which is the entrance you normally use.
Anyway, that's something inside the granite box.
There could have been something inside the granite box, of course. We don't know. I doubt if there was a sarcophagus in there, a mummy, because that's not what these pyramids are for. The pyramids have an empty chamber and an empty tomb. It's Masonic. It's the same as doing the third degree.
Sure.
A Masonic chamber is a 2x1 chamber, which is exactly the same as the king's chamber is a 2x1 chamber with an empty tomb in it, which is exactly the same as every church. If you go to a church or a cathedral, every cathedral has an empty chamber, an empty sarcophagus, which is known as the altar, because the altar is the empty sarcophagus, which proves that Jesus was resurrected. That's why they have an altar, which is an empty sarcophagus.
Makes sense.
It's a symbol of the resurrection, and that's exactly what they had in the Great Pyramid as well. That's why they're not tombs for actual kings. It's symbolic of death and rebirth.
Sure. If you go to the, I think it's the Osirium, you'll see the tunnel that represents the going into the underground in darkness. You had the granite box where the initiated would rest, and then they will pick him up at dawn, and he will emerge through the waters. That means the breaking of the waters of the mother, through the waters into the light. There is the rising sun directly in front of them. So the whole ritual was a simulation of death and rebirth. So I'm just connecting the dots with what you were saying.
Yeah, this was the religion of the era, and it's also connected with the cosmos as well, because the sun did the same. The sun died in the west, it went through the underworld, and it was reborn into in exactly the same fashion. They're all very connected. But anyway, this is what we find. This is the four shafts. Now they've been discovered, so we know the four shafts. They're all pointing at various angles, and you will have seen, courtesy of one of the researchers, that they're supposed to be pointing at stars. So they're supposed to be star pointers, pointing at Orion and pointing at Sirius. But they're not. This is incorrect. He's led us up the garden path. So they don't point to Orion and Sirius, because what he doesn't say is there's like 3 months in between these two. If you're pointing at Orion with the king's chamber shaft, Sirius doesn't arrive at its culmination for another 3 months. So they're not pointing simultaneously like it looks on this diagram. So that's a bit of a cheat for starters. And then the northern shafts, they don't point at anything really. So I've written here, any circumpolar star of your choosing, because there are no, even in the era, because remember these stars process around, even in the era when this was built, there are no specific bright stars that the northern shafts can be pointing to. So these are not star pointers, these shafts. And the question is, what are they? And we can tell what they are from the angles. So we've got the angles 45, 32.5, 39, 39. And what are they? Well, if we look at these in a tabular format, here they are. And if we divide one from the other, no, don't you dare, Cat. He's looking at the cursor and he's going to attack. No. So 45 minus 39.5 is 5.5, and 39.5 minus 32.5 is 7. And we should know what these numbers are by now. It's pi. So that's a quarter of the 22. Remember, pi is 22 over 7. That's a quarter of pi. So these are pi shafts. They're not star shafts at all. They're pointing at pi. And a pi shaft is a fixed angle. And so it doesn't have the freedom to point at a particular star at a particular date.
But
so
that leaves us with what was the intention beyond the mathematical.
Yes. So what else needs certain precise numbers? If we're not pointing at stars anymore, what has precise numbers in degrees? Latitudes and longitudes.
Yeah.
And I think this is cartographical, because what are these chambers? We've got all these straight. I mean, what on earth is the Grand Gallery? All of these passageways are only about 1 meter by 1 meter. And suddenly you go up the ascending passageway and it broadens out into this enormous Grand Gallery, which is like 18 meters high. You go, what on earth is that for? Has no function. And then you get the Queen's Chamber, we'll forget about that. And then King's Chamber. And on top of the King's Chamber, you get all of these secondary chambers up the top, which are supposed to be, they called them relieving chambers. Yeah. They're supposed to relieve the pressure, but
it doesn't make sense.
No, the Queen's Chamber doesn't need them. And they don't really relieve any pressure at all, because the top layer still has to take the weight of the pyramid above it. So they are
not really centered. It's not centered.
No,
so the weight...
it's not centered. So what are they? Well, I found out what they are when the diagram I was using turned itself upside down on my wall. And so you end up with this. And now you can see what these chambers are. But I'm not surprised you can't see it, because it took me like about 6 months to see it. Yeah, probably less than that, maybe 2 or 3 months. And I was sitting there looking at this diagram thinking, what? No. It's the continents of the Earth. It's another Earth diagram. So if we have a look at this, we have Asia, we have the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf and the Arabias, and then the King's Chamber is Africa running down. It's a diagrammatic representation of the
world as they knew it.
Yeah, of the continents of the world. And we know this because of Africa. Here's Africa. Each of these relieving chambers is 10 degrees of latitude. And they match up with the degrees of latitude all the way down Africa until we get the little triangle at the bottom, which is the roof of the King's Chamber. So yeah, the King's Chamber is a representation of Africa, complete with latitude markers. And we've already seen the latitude markers at Avebury. So we know they could measure lines of latitude, and we know they could sail around Africa. That's what they were drawing.
It's amazing.
It's a map of the world. But the trouble is, what do you do with a map of the world? Well, what do we do with maps? We draw things on it. We draw X marks the spot, as we were doing with Avebury. And how do we do that? Well, we do it with latitudes and longitudes. But we've already discovered the latitudes and longitudes because we've got the shaft angles. So all we need to do is draw the shaft angles on a map of the world. And here we go. And what I've done is I've used the Giza meridian, because it's pretty obvious that Giza would be the, you know, the primary meridian they're going to use.
The Mundus axis.
Yeah, the 0 point. and measure from there. They're not going to use the London one, of course, that we use nowadays. And we measure from there. And here are those numbers. You can recognize them: 32, 45, 39, 39. The 39s are the Queen's Chamber measurements, and these two are the King's Chamber measurements. And you draw them out on a map, and you end up with a triangle, of course. And that triangle has the same dimensions as the Great Pyramid. Because remember, the Great Pyramid is a pi pyramid. It's 7 high and 11 across the base. And this triangle on the map is 7 high and 11 along the base. It's a big Great Pyramid stuck on your map. And the question is then, where is this triangle? You know, so you've got to measure it out. And again, I was doing this on maps because there was no internet in these days. So I had to go back down to Stanford's and buy all these maps of the region. And you come out with, oh, that's the same diagram. There we go. That's, you come out with something like this. And that's where the big triangle ends up. It ends up in the Karakoram, which is in the Western Himalaya. It's where Alexander the Great was. You were talking about Alexander the Great earlier and his trek around the whole of the world. Well, he ended up in the Karakoram. Why on earth was Alexander the Great up in the Karakoram? He went here to the top of this triangle. Looking for mountains. He was having a pithos every time he saw a big mountain, which he thought was sacred for some reason. And a pithos is they have a big Bacchic party where they all get drunk. And
nothing to do with the Hall of Records.
Well, you don't know what he was looking for, do you? So we don't know. He was looking for something. He wasn't just there battling Darius III. Darius III had been chased away and probably dead by that time.
Let me see if I have the Dalai Lama on speed dial, and I can
ask him. Yeah,
just ask him real quick, Chris Ricardo. Yeah, that would be perfect.
So again, I had no maps of this region. So this came from the space shuttle. So I got a space shuttle map. Cost me 30 quid. This did. This is back in the 1990s. This is like 30 years ago.
Think how much aerial maps must have cost hunter-gatherers back in the day for them to assemble all these sites. Think we got it bad now. Jeez.
So yeah, this is the area we're looking at. It's right up in the high Himalaya. And this is the glacier you have to walk up. This is the Boltero. Because, let's look at this first. This is the triangle on a Google map, which is much easier to draw than me drawing it on a paper map. And so what I decided on was the center. This is the big triangle that we've made with our map coordinates. And I thought, oh, I'll take the center of the circle, which is exactly here. Now, it doesn't look like the center, but remember, this is a Lambert conical conformal map, which stretches the more you go to the north. So you have to, this is the geographic center is here.
Compensate for that, yes.
Absolutely, you've got to compensate. So that's the center. And that, if you transfer it onto here, is here. And that might not look like much, but that is K2. The second highest mountain in the world is there.
And we made a complete circle.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's very difficult to get to. This is the trail. So you've got to walk down this trail to get to K2. And the fall off, if you happen to misstep, is over 1,000 foot.
Oh.
So you go down and there's no one there to stop you if you fall off this trail.
No.
This is a goat track. It really is. I mean, it's amazing. Anyway, you walk up the Boltero and you finally, the Boltero is the glacier, this big glacier. And the glacier, this is the glacier. It doesn't look, this is the glacier. It doesn't look like a glacier because it gets covered in rock, and obviously the ice on the top just sublimates it. It evaporates away, leaving all the rocks on the top of it. So this is the ice glacier, and it's shifting under your feet. You can hear it, creaking and groaning under your feet. And in the back we have K2, and this is K2. And K2 is a bit of a pyramid. Now, the reason I actually went up there is not because of any of these maps. You wouldn't go up there because you had seen this map. What I didn't have is a map again. Standard problem, pre-internet era. There was no Google Maps. How do you get a map of this region? Well, Stanford's didn't have one. Nobody had one. But they kindly said, well, they said, go to China. Because this is in China, would you believe? This site, K2 sits on the border between Pakistan and China. So half of K2 is in Pakistan and the other half is in China. Pakistan, as they said down at Stanford's, you won't get anything from Pakistan. But China might have a map because this is militarily sensitive area. And therefore they might have done some mapping in that region. So go to China and find out what they've got. So I wrote to China via the embassy, as you say, and this is K2 again, looking up the glacier. This is the glacier covered in rock, and that's K2 at the top. So I went to the embassy and they said, well, yeah, they gave me an address, which was Beijing University, basically. And said, write to them and see if they got a map. So I wrote to them and they wrote back. And of course, this takes like 2 months coming back. You know, you finally get a letter back in the post and it says, yes, we've got a map. Will cost you $20 or whatever it was. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a bargain. I'll go for that. So I bought a map, and another 3 months later, and of course, I don't have any yuan. How in those days do you give them yuan? So I stuck a $20 bill in the letter. And threw it off. And finally, this map came back from China. I opened it up and I put it on the table, and I fell off my chair. Why did I fall off my chair? Because K2 is a pyramid. And this is the pyramid that I found. So on the right, we have the Great Pyramid. On the left, we have K2. And it's a perfect pyramid aligned with cardinal points, exactly the same as the Great Pyramid. And it has a causeway coming out at the bottom at 14 degrees, just as the Great Pyramid has a causeway coming out of the bottom at 14 degrees. It's an exact copy of the Great Pyramid. Or rather, I should say, the Great Pyramid is an exact copy of K2. Tricky, isn't it?
It's pretty amazing.
So, you know, if we're saying this is sort of Neolithic age, what the hell was Neolithic man doing up in the Himalaya? Discovering what K2 looks like and drawing a copy of K2 down.
Why was it so significant? They felt compelled to recreate it.
Precisely. And we've got the same problem as Avebury. We've seen this Avebury problem. You know, what were they doing down in the South Atlantic, drawing pictures of the South Sandwich Islands? What were they doing up in the Himalaya, drawing images of the K2 pyramid? Have I got any?
Well, not just drawing them, but representing them mathematically, completely accurately.
Yes.
They were reproducing exact mathematics of what they were seeing that we can only now see from an aerial view or from an exploded three-dimensional view, as in the case of the pyramid, looking at the shafts and how they coordinate. You could only see that if you knew the you know, either the schematics of it or could scan and have a full three-dimensional view of it.
You would need an aircraft. You would need an aircraft to survey it, because all of this around here, this is all glacier. Now up here, this is all fissured glacier. So this is how you normally see a glacier. It's all snow with enormous great fissures. You need climbing equipment to go around here. This is difficult country. You cannot survey this easily at all on the ground. You've really got to do this from the air.
Well, and even if they trek to the top of it,
Yeah.
you're still not going to get the full view, even if you're standing at the top of it.
It's really steep. It's more difficult to climb than Everest.
That's
You're
amazing.
not going to get to the top of it. They do it today, but very, very few. You think of how many people have gone up Mount Everest. Hundreds of people gone up Mount Everest.
It's much harder. K2 is much harder.
Much harder.
Yeah.
K2, probably a handful of people have ever been to the top. It is treacherous. It is a very steep pyramid. So yeah, how would you ever do that? And the other problem is we have a mathematical distance and direction between K2 and the Great Pyramid. There is a relationship, a pi relationship, because remember we found K2 by getting pi from the position of the Great Pyramid. Let's go back to it. We had this mathematical relationship between the position of the Great Pyramid and the position of K2, which is defined by pi. 39.5, 39.5, 45, and 32.5 are the coordinates, which are pi coordinates, which gave us the position of K2. So there is a mathematical function between these two objects. So if K2 is fixed, then the Great Pyramid has to be in a very specific location relative to K2. However, if you look at the Great Pyramid, it's sitting on the 30-degree parallel north, right next to the Nile. That is also in a fixed specific location. So how can you have two fixed specific locations separated by pi? It's not possible, is it? One of these has to be artificial. But the Great Pyramid is sitting on the 30th parallel north. That can't really be artificial. That can't be a movable item. So I think the Great Pyramid is the fixed position, and the one that was created is K2. Which would mean that K2 is an artificial mounting.
Interesting. That makes me think of Gunyang Pudang and Danny Natawajia's work that he's done there, kind of insinuating that it seems if it was natural, it was definitely heavily augmented to be a pyramid.
Well, we've done this before. Of course, if you look at things like Herodium down in Israel, which is Tekoa, they call it, which is the big pyramid in Israel, conical pyramid. That is a natural mesa that they've crafted it into a pyramid. But obviously on a much smaller scale than we're talking here. I mean, this is just absolutely huge.
Yeah, you also have the Bosnian pyramids, for instance.
And
yes,
yeah, they seem to do it quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're natural or not, but
sure. But the tunnels aren't natural for sure. So
right. So they built tunnels under them. But so we have this conundrum, which is the original and which is the copy. Is the Great Pyramid the copy, separated by a pi distance and angle from K2, or is K2 the copy, separated by a pi distance and angle from the Great Pyramid? Whichever way you look at it, it's a hell of a conundrum, especially when we're supposed to be talking about the Neolithic society. Tricky, isn't it? And that's why I say this is esoteric, because it comes from the data. I mean, the data is there. Anyone can look at this data and have a look at it, find out what they find. But then the results of your research start to be unpalatable for many people because it raises too many questions that cannot easily be answered. And of course, the other question is, why on earth bother? What's the point of this? Again, we come back to the idea of the Hall of Records, because we had this chap a long time ago wrote a book about this, saying that the Hall of Records was at Giza. And I'm saying, now, hold on a minute. You're not going to bury something that's very important in a place where you could find it by digging, a local latrine or something and just stumbling across it. That's not what you would do to hide something that is special. You would put it somewhere remote and then put a pointer pointing to the remote place, which would mean that the Hall of Records would not be at Giza. The Hall of Records would be at K2. And since we have a pyramid with a chamber inside it, well, maybe we've got a pyramid with a chamber inside it. So you might find that, there is a passageway into K2, which goes down into K2, and which would be on this side here, and goes down into K2 and has a chamber inside K2.
From the little I know from this area, it's full with caves. So
yeah, but this wouldn't be
this
wouldn't be a natural cave. This would be a man.
Sure. But what they call caves, well, what academics call caves, we know that sometimes they are not very accurate about it. And this is a remote place.
Hugely remote. I mean, if you're going to keep something safe, there is nothing safer than here. I mean, you can count, as I say, the number of people who've got to the top of K2 on one hand. You can count the number of people who've got, because we only got to here, which is the bit down the bottom here is Concordia, where two glaciers meet, and then this bit is just the base of the pyramid. The number of people who have got here, you might number them in 1,000 or 2,000 in the lifetime of mankind. There's not many people get up to here. It's a pretty. It took us nearly 3 weeks to get up there, because there are no roads. You've got to walk all the way from Skardu, I suppose. Skardu is the biggest town. It's got an airport, and then you can drive 1 day's drive out of Skardu, and the road ends.
It must be quite a sight to be climbing that glacier and finally seeing the peak of the mountain appearing.
Yes, after all that climbing, it's a lot of. It's just camping in tents. Obviously, there's nowhere to camp. You're just camping on the side of the path. You've got to take all your food with you. Our food was 2 goats, so I named them. One was called lunch, and the other one was called dinner.
There we go.
Practicality.
Well, it's easier if your food can actually walk. So that's the reason they do it.
Yeah, that's pretty smart.
Yeah, there's no point taking it on your back if it can walk. So yeah, lunch and dinner walked all the way up to Concordia. No, sorry, lunch didn't. Only dinner got to Concordia.
Not everybody got to see the view.
Yeah. So yeah, it was quite a dramatic trek. There was a few. I was up there, almost peak season, I suppose, and there was another party of Japanese were up there as well. It was about.
And from what you've seen directly, without being through an image, can you discern any artificial aspects of the mountain?
No. No, not at all.
It looks completely natural.
Yeah, it looks completely natural, except that it is all on its own. If you look at all of the other
I've seen that in the topographic map. I noticed that.
Yeah, all of the other ones are part of a range.
Well, China seems to have quite a few very pyramidal mountains.
Sorry, China has?
They seem to have quite a few very pyramidal shaped mountains.
Right.
Uh,
Well, the one
aside
that
from
people
K2.
the one that people always talk about is Kailash. But my figures didn't point at Kailash because everyone thinks Kailash is the sacred mountain,
Yes,
and that's sort of pyramidal as well.
it's the
Unless,
Grail, the
yeah.
physical Grail.
Well, I think K2 is more like the Grail.
No, I mean in the sense of being the decoy.
Oh, I
Of
see what you mean. Yes,
yeah.
yes, yeah. Well, that's possible. Yeah, why not have a decoy? Sounds like a good idea to me. To me. So it was just a very interesting research project, which didn't obviously come to fruition because we didn't find anything. But what would be needed again is some sort of scanning equipment. So, something looking for magnetic anomalies, penetrating radar, all of that sort of stuff.
Can it be done by satellite?
You could probably take some measurements by satellite, but you'd be a long way above. So it would be much better if you could take an aircraft over the top of it and do a survey.
Have you checked for maps for I could look it right now, but it would take time. Have you looked for maps for the electromagnetic field?
Yeah, magnetic survey. No, I've not looked for one because in those days there wasn't simply one, and I've shelved this and not looked at it since. But nowadays, yeah, you might find a magnetic survey done by
all of
aircraft.
America and Mexico has been surveyed for
Has it?
geomagnetic anomalies. So they've
Yep.
China, I would think, probably very well has.
And
this
someone
one.
might have done a LiDAR as well. That might show up something because LiDAR did not exist when I was doing this research. That's all new technology.
But LiDAR wouldn't be affected in stone.
No, it'll give you a much more accurate outline of the stone. But the best one would be obviously a magnetic survey, because if you're going to leave something, like a hall of records, you would want to mark where the door is. And how would you do that? Well, a magnetic anomaly would be the best way. That's how they discovered, if you remember, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yep.
My favorite ever film from 1968. And the way they found the anomaly on the moon
was a
magnetic anomaly. And then they dug down, of course, where this anomaly was, and they found the monolith, which was a communication device.
Yeah.
Now, okay, this is only a fictional book, but that's the sort of thing that you could be talking about here, because we're not talking about Neolithic man here. I mean, we're way beyond the realms of Neolithic man.
Were you using radios up there?
No, we had no radios, and of course radios wouldn't work up there. They will now because we've got satellites, but you're stuck down in the valley, so you've got no way.
I mean radios between the team, like small walkie-talkies or something.
No, we were just together in a team. We shout.
Okay.
Because you can shout 2 kilometers up the valley.
Sure,
everyone can hear you.
I was just wondering if the radios would work there, because if the mountain irradiates some kind of energy.
Oh, right. Would you pick it up?
Yeah.
I suppose you could do that. I think one of the guys had a shortwave radio, was picking up shortwave local Pakistani music. Yeah, so I suppose you could do something like that, do a radio survey.
And I'm sure you'll find a good geomagnetic map of that area, because the whole globe has been searched for that.
Very
I'm going to dig into it
remote.
after this. Sure.
Yeah, it's very remote. I mean, it'd be nice to have a look. It's something that needs to be looked at, but it's a very remote place where there is no known minerals worthy of, I mean, the reason they do a lot of these surveys is because they're looking for mineral deposits and things of this nature.
Sometimes they disguise the occult reasons with the metal.
Oh, well, yes, that's possible, yeah. But in terms of minerals, the Himalaya are a bit of a disaster area. When India plowed into Asia to create the Himalaya, it crushed all of these rocks.
Yeah.
And so there are not many strata you can possibly use for minerals. It's a load of jumbled rock, most of it, up in the Himalaya.
That's curious you mentioned that, because I know as a fact that K1, there is the peak that almost everyone goes to climb, is still rising.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
about
it is.
2 centimeters or 3 centimeters a year, I'm not sure. So if this is not natural, and considering that is the top of the mountain that is rising along with the plateau, I would wonder if this mountain isn't rising.
I would imagine it probably is, because of the ground underneath is affected by the same
but the
tectonic.
geometry of the mountain wouldn't be affected by it.
Oh no, it would just, it's like a piece of scum on the top of a pudding. It would just go up.
But the Himalaya, in the K1, that doesn't happen. The morphology of the mountain itself is being changed.
Oh, okay, right.
So I would be curious to see if this one has that kind of changes, or it's just the bedrock that is rising instead of.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anyone's done any research on that. Again, it'd be interesting. This is all 30-year-old research, so it really needs a sort of modern look at it. Now we've got all of this technology and this internet. Might find something more interesting out of this. Certainly worth having another look.
Yeah, look, this was an amazing voyage for this information that I'm sure only a few people had seen it, or perhaps remembered from your books from back then.
This is very good to bring back to the surface, because there's so many things that, I mean, we know that China technologically has exploited as much of the area as they can to scan and see what's available to them. So I would imagine there's got to be, who knows if they're available, but some pretty good scans and concise measurements on the K2.
My daughter is in China studying. She's at Beijing.
If she has access to the university, she might have some information there.
Yeah, I might reach her and see if she can find any relevant maps or dating or some sort of archive that they have about the area. I might look into it and see if she can find anything. She's studying Chinese, not history, but
okay.
But the university has many courses where she is. So,
but you might recall that I was talking about mountains that were covered in snow.
Yeah.
Now you know why I was talking about mountains covered in snow. So the Great Pyramid is right at the top, K2. It's all covered in snow. Second pyramid is mostly snow, but it's got a little bit of rock at the bottom. And then the third pyramid is only half snow with a big layer of rock at the bottom. And that's because we're talking about these mountains here. K2 is up the top, whereas these mountains down the bottom have rocky bits on the bottom. So we're looking like a mountain range.
So if you took a geomarker from the Great Pyramid, what can you take from the other two pyramids?
Well, I don't know. You see, the other two pyramids, the other symbology is obviously they're aligned with the belt of Orion. Right. So they're using a dual symbolism here. They're all of them are mountains, but all of them also are cosmic because they are the belt of Orion. So we've got a dual sort of symbolism.
So we don't see any of that around the K2, right? There's no like star alignments or anything similar.
No, there's not three mountains here. No. I think that would be too obvious if whoever was doing this put three mountains.
Yeah, I was wondering if there were not three locations instead of three mountains.
Well, that could be another possibility. Well, that's the problem with K2. Sorry, with the second pyramid. Remember, we didn't fully understand what the 6.75 was, and what the significance of the new rod measurement system was. Perhaps there is something to be gleaned from the second pyramid. We don't know.
Is that measure used by any ancient civilization?
I don't know. I've not found it, no. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It could well exist. Yeah, 6.75. You would have to go around all of these ancient monuments because most of them use the cubit system, and some of the larger ones do use the rod system, but I've not found a 6.75. You'd have to just measure all of these ancient monuments and divide by 5.5 and then divide by 6.75 and see if you get any whole numbers to drop out of it.
I believe it's the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico that shares many numerical similarities with the Great Pyramid.
Yes, now that would be interesting. I didn't have any good data on the exact measurements, but if any exact measurements are available, it would be interesting to see if they were using the same measurement systems.
I believe I've definitely seen some. They're out there, and there is a alarming amount of similarities in measurements, precisely to the Great Pyramid, denoting seemingly a lot of those alignments and a lot of the messages that we're encoding strictly through the mathematics about our planets, its position, stuff like that. So I would be curious to pull that up and kind of see what the correlation is between that, K2, the Great Pyramid. There might be quite a few of these.
And those pyramids also are in the same shape as the Belt of Orion, aren't they? They're exactly the same.
Right. That's one of there's quite a few. See, the New World to me, there's so many connections, to the Old World as it was. And being constructed roughly around, the time of Jesus, give or take.
I think they're much older than that, of course, but there we go.
I think they would have to be, right? Because we see these similarities in the mathematics, the Masonic encoding going between these sites. It kind of almost immediately blows the traditional dating out of the water.
Yes, and so does the astronomical dating. We haven't really come on to that because we've been a long time on this. But the astronomical dating I've done, looking at precession of the equinox and the obliquity of the Earth on these monuments, again points to a very old date. The trouble
65,000 years, haven't you found, is when they professionally lined up?
66,000 years ago. Yeah. And the question then becomes, can these monuments survive 66,000 years? And I think they probably could. Certainly Avebury could. The Giza pyramids might need repairs over that amount of time to stay that amount of time. Well, but it's possible.
We know for sure that when the Burkle event happened, that the pyramids were already there. So at least around 4000 BC, both the base of the Sphinx and the main pyramid that has the erosion markers was already there. I'm not speaking about the second and the third pyramid because I don't know, but the first one has the markers and the level of the water, where the water reached to after the Burkle crater event. So at least at that moment in time, no matter what academics say, they were already there.
I think the minimum date is about 13,000 years ago from the astronomical dating. The only problem that we've had recently is some of the carbon-14 dating came out with 4,500 years ago. Not sure why that is. I've looked at some of their techniques and data.
It's pretty simple. It happens because they can only date biological matter. Now, who is to say when that biological matter was dropped there? If they're using luminar techniques on the stone, because they now think they can date stone by light, if they use that kind of technology, they can say when was that last time that stone saw light.
Yes.
So that can give us a measure, but it hasn't been done because it would contradict their values, so they won't do it on the pyramids.
Blow a lot out of the water if they did that, Ricardo.
and yes, the carbon they were using is supposed to have been from the mud between the bricks, but it's so easy to get contamination because the top of the Great Pyramid was used for making bonfires. I don't know if you know, but during the sort of Victorian era, they used to take tourists up there and make a barbecue for them on the top of the pyramid. So there was huge amounts of, carbon being dropped
Of
from the
course.
charcoal.
Of course.
So
So, and where is the pyramid on? It was made covered.
no, I
with
think it was always it was always flat at the top. The whole point was it was an astronomical observation platform, and it's probably the best observatory in the whole of.
How
of
would
the
they
Near East.
climb there if the wall?
There would have to be a
was
set of
smooth.
steps to the top. But remember, that's what the Bible says. You know, this is Jacob's ladder that goes to the top of,
Sure.
the pyramid, as it were. This is, what masonry says. The 7 steps to the top of masonry. But of course, the Great Pyramid is a symbolic 7 steps to the top. It's pi, 22/7. It's 7 steps to the top of the pyramid.
And 7 stones from the top down is the level where the controversial team that found a movable stone, it was on the 7th level counting down.
Yep.
That they managed to open the stone that retracted, and they found a stairway that went from that point of the pyramid to much beneath the Queen's chamber. They took about 18,000 photographs of that, but it ended up with 2 teams of the team dead. The federals invaded their office and took the microfilms, vanished with all the equipment. So all that we have of that is just an article that came previously to the bust from the federal agency, relating with the diagrams and relating what they found and the descriptions that they made. So
okay, I've not seen that. Yeah, so there are no photos then available.
No, just the descriptions of this. It was a team of 18 people from various areas of investigation during the 80s, 90s, when the pyramids were still accessible. But they were on their own risk. They paid the guard, and they, on their own risk, they climbed the pyramid trying to find the entrance. They spent 2 weeks trying to find the correct stone. They had a diagram of sorts. And then the day before the last day that they had programmed, they finally found the movable stone, and they say that they entered, and they took, I'm not sure if it was 16 hours to get all the stairs down, which they regretted. They didn't carry any food or water or anything like that. So they have to return the next day, climb all the way up, and return with material on the next day. And from that day onwards, they took the pictures and created the microfilms. So, but it's all gone now. But I just remembered because it was the 7th level from the top down on the east side, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Okay. Yeah, don't know anything about that. But anyway, the number 7 is important because it's the denominator in the fractional equivalent of pi, and that's why the pyramid is 280 cubits high. Divided by 40, you end up with 7. And that's the height of the pyramid is 7. And that's why we get that same reference within Masonry, because a lot of people within Freemasonry say that the original building project of Freemasonry was not the Temple of Jerusalem. It was actually the Great Pyramid.
The Great Pyramid, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why you get it on the back of the dollar note and things of that nature. And of course, the one on the back of the dollar note has a platform on the top. And we have a good idea from the biblical texts. They say that they had the mountain with the fire and smoke on the top of the mountain, and that's probably what they were doing. They were probably having roast sacrifice on the top of the pyramid, and also using it.
I think that's a later time, because
it's much later, but they would have passed these traditions down through the priesthood. These were temples that were tended by the priesthood.
What I mean is, they didn't need to make a fire if the site was active. There would be a light on the top of the pyramid.
Well, possibly, but they had roast sacrifice was the traditional sacrifice of the Israelites. Because remember, this was
The
the
offering.
Israelites'
Yeah.
mountain of God. This was Mount Sinai. And so
Sure.
if you're going to do a roast sacrifice anywhere, you would do it on the top of the pyramid.
I give you this example: the mountain of Sintra in Portugal.
Mhm.
I spent some of years of my youth, and it is my favorite place to go, and I slept there many times. And we always thought that the glow, the greenish glow that we see almost every single day above the mountain, was caused by the illumination of the palace or the castle or whatever. But it isn't. It is the actual energy of the mountain that creates an aerial phenomenon described scientifically that creates that glow that is completely natural. So that green light that we see above the mountain is not caused by artificial lightning, but by the energy of the mountain itself. Now you relate this with the fact that the Moors that took this from the 1600s considered Sintra as one of the 6 remaining paradise on earth. So where are the other 5? They say the other 5 were lost, and that one was the only one remaining, still known as such. So imagine a mountain that has 600 meters in height and is all covered in artificial tunnels. Some of them have 8 miles long and go from one pinnacle of the mountain through a valley into another pinnacle on the other side of the mountain. So we're talking about huge tunnels. So I wonder if you're not talking about the same thing here. The very energy of the site can create these luminous effects. So perhaps when they're doing the fire on top, they're recreating a lost technology, but as they could, they knew that there was the ceremony was to be performed on that top and creating the fire and so on. And I wonder if that's not a fabled attempt to recreate an ancient phenomenon.
Yeah, don't know. But I do think there was a platform on the top from the very beginning.
Okay.
This was always I was going to say the dream, but I don't think it's the dream. I think it's the quest is to finish the pyramid, to put the capstone on the top. But that's, that comes from Freemasonry again. But in order for this to have been so, then you would need a set of steps to the top of the pyramid. You can't be building scaffolding all the way to the top of the Great Pyramid. There must have been a set of steps within the casing blocks, but of course all the casing blocks have gone, and so we don't know if that's true. But you would end up with a set of steps. It would be just like the Central American pyramids. Every Central American pyramid has a set of steps to the top. It would be exactly the same as that, no different.
Sure.
And I think that's reasonable to assume, because we have the story of Jacob's ladder and all of these different old traditions. And I think that's probably what they were talking about.
And the 7's encoded so heavily into the Bible.
Yes,
well,
absolutely.
A lot of religions, but in the Christian Bible specifically, you see the 7 repeated over and over.
Yes. Yeah, they certainly knew about pi, so that's what they were doing. And that's one of the reasons I got so interested in the Old Testament, because you can see now the connections between the megaliths and the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So that's what I was looking at.
That is amazing. It's a lot of big coincidences, isn't it?
There is. I mean, people will say, because I've obviously talked about this for many years, and people will say coincidence. But there's a whole load of coincidences there. How many times can you say coincidence before? The trouble is the implications are too dramatic for some people. It's too heavy. It does mean you need alien intervention is the only way you can explain this.
No, you just need intelligent design. You don't need anything else.
Well, if you believe in gods, I don't believe in the gods. So, well, you could choose that, I suppose.
It depends what you call a god.
Well, I suppose, but if you have an ancient alien, they are the gods, aren't they? So it's exactly the same philosophy.
We would be viewed as a god to a man in the 1800s.
Absolutely.
If we
Well,
walked
yeah,
back,
you would.
drove a Tesla down the road.
Yeah,
in
with your
the 1800s,
iPhone, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would be a god even going back a few hundred years. So yes, you can imagine an alien technology. They would be the gods if they came down to Earth in their little flying spaceship.
Look,
But
Mel
of course,
Gibson shows that in his movie Apocalypto.
okay, I didn't see that one. Yeah,
Because
incredible movie.
because you see that the guys that are doing the sacrifice to appease the dragon that is eating the sun in the eclipse, they know that the eclipse will come from one side of the sun and the sun will appear on the other side as the shadow of the earth is moving. But the people down there doesn't know. So when they kill the guy in the right moment where the sun is completely blocked, they are all laughing because they know what's going on, while the people down there is completely frightened. And then they rejoice. Look, the heart is here. We sacrificed the man. And now the sun will come up again. The gods were appeased. And the populations went crazy because, wow, this guy really can talk to God. He can appease him. We will live in darkness if it wasn't for him.
Well, that's how Joseph lived, wasn't it? He did exactly the same in the Old Testament. That, you know, if you know this sort of information, if you are an astronomer and you can amaze the populace, then of course, yes, it's going to make you powerful.
Well, it really shows how the right information held by the right people can control an entire populace.
Oh yes, yes.
Just withholding simple astronomical facts.
Yes.
Something you don't have any control about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any at all. You just
it's easy to cow the populace. I mean, look what they did with COVID. They cowed everybody. It's the same sort of thing. But going back to this information, if you believe that this is what Avebury was pointing at and what the Great Pyramid is pointing at, then you have to have an intervention policy or explanation, because this is not Neolithic. This is not even modern man. We can barely do this ourselves. You know, if you can do Avebury, you know, you can measure where the South Sandwich Islands are, but if you're talking about excavating K2, utterly impossible. It's that needs some super high technology in order to do that. But they liked making megaliths in those era. I mean, you look at Lebanon with the Baalbek stones weighing, you know, 1,400 tons. There was excavating going on. If you look at the history of Bacchus, you know, within Greek mythology, Bacchus, and I relate this in the K2 book as well, for some reason Bacchus was up in the Himalaya carving mountains. That's what it says. The whole story of Bacchus is about him and his helpers. They were sort of vegetation-based helpers, and they had these wands of ivy, from which they could carve out mountains. And you think, what a strange story. What's all that about? But, you know, here we have sort of evidence for people carving out mountains for no good reason. It's all fairly bizarre. So we have no final revelation. The revelations are yet to come.
Yeah, I would reconcile your ideas with a possible initial nature mountain that was perfected to the shape of the pyramid, and some great gallery inside the mountain was then excavated and carved in such proportions or in such measures that make it natural and man-made, or whatever you want to call it, structure. Because it would be very hard to prove K2 as a something that is artificial, because everyone will say it's a massive block of granite or whatever the stone that is that mountain is made of. So we don't see the divisions. It's hard to explain people that can be artificial, because there's no way to look at it and see something made instead of something natural. So I would reconcile both of them in the search of the solution.
I suppose the simplest solution would be to say that, you know, K2 is the original and the Great Pyramid is the copy, but it's still a bizarre project that is beyond the realms of Neolithic man.
Yeah.
Totally. You know,
as we understand it. But
yeah, as we understand it.
I believe that if you the manuscript that I sent you, I'm sorry if you had some mistakes or some repeated words, because it's just a draft. I've just finished received the last review and fixed those minor errors that it has. But if you read it, you'll find that Neolithic man was not so deprived of technology as we are made to believe.
Yes, they might have been very intelligent. They might have had a great scientific understanding, but there is still no technological society to go alongside it. I mean, we don't find Neolithic railways and, you know, Neolithic aircraft and things. So
because
there was not
didn't need it.
Yeah, but you would find, you know, if you had the technology for making all of these megaliths, you would need some sort of technology, actual mechanical equipment to go along with it. Otherwise, you can't make these projects.
I will expect.
But we don't find any of that equipment.
You won't find it if you honor me with in your own time to read it, even if it takes a year or two. you will see that scientifically that can be explained by the use of just natural energies and magnetism and telluric currents and alignments, and that can be achieved without needing for that kind of mechanisms.
Right.
Well, I think one thing that's very clear is the ancient world that constructed these had a profound understanding of our earthly functions and our cosmic functions, well ahead of where we like to give them credit, certainly, and arguably as advanced or more so than we are even currently.
Sure. You have to look at your own conclusions, Ralph, because you showed us that the people that built Albury knew not only where they are building in terms of the globe, they knew remote areas of the globe, and they are also represented there. So the implications in technology and knowledge, because that knowledge requires technology to be obtained. So it means that their technology achievements in terms of recognizing where they are and what the Earth is and its geometry and its proportions and so on imply a vast technological knowledge that is different from ours, for sure, but it still needs to be highly assertive and very complex to reach to that same conclusions without a computer.
Yeah, but it can also be explained by an intervention. So if you have an alien intervention, they can do the research, they can go and find the South Sandwich Islands, and they can give the plans to the local people up in Wiltshire who can build Avebury. So it's very explainable if you have alien intervention. But even if you suggest that, sorry, say again.
The Mesopotamians seem to allude to that pretty heavily.
Lots of people do. But if you say that in the modern world, again, it's still not acceptable to put that down as a proposal in the modern world. Even though if you talk to every astronomer there is and most scientists there is and say what's the possibility of life elsewhere in the galaxy, most of them will say, yeah, most definitely there is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe.
Equation.
Yeah, absolutely, all of that. But then if you say the specific, which is, has that intelligent civilization ever visited Earth, they'll say, oh, no, of course, no evidence, no evidence. Suddenly there is this barrier that they will not cross, and you're made to be a complete quack or, tinfoil hatter if you try to explain something in terms of an alien intervention. But I see no other explanation myself. That's my favorite explanation for all of this, is that there was a 2001 style intervention. In 2001, they came and did a teaching project to the poor old caveman who was about to expire. They had difficulty surviving, and they were taught how to survive. This is the same argument that, you have an alien intervention, and they came down, they found like a Neolithic man, so not a primeval, but a Neolithic man, and they had a little bit of education, and then they pissed off
of
back.
the earth.
Yeah, and disappeared off back into the universe somewhere again. Just like 2001: A Space Odyssey. But just like 2000 Space Odyssey, they would leave a marker, some sort of evidence that they have been there. Now, in 2001, it was a monolith, and you have to go and find the monolith. Here, maybe it's a pyramid, maybe it's a K2 pyramid, and that's what you've got to go and find, that the alien species has left on Earth.
Yeah, remember that the monolith was on the far side of the moon.
Of the moon, so you couldn't find
it required certain technological achievement in order to be found.
I mean, it's the perfect idea, isn't it? You're not going to find it until you're spacefaring.
Until you're ready for it. Yep.
Until you're ready for it. It's ideal, isn't it? This is a bit closer to home, but you still got to be pretty technological before you can get up there and find it. So you've still got to be fairly advanced.
Look, in my cosmology, and from my research in mythology, I think that the story doesn't start here. I think that the story starts in Mars and the destruction of Saturn, that is the planet that used to be between Mars and Jupiter and now is the asteroid belt. So I think that the destruction of that planet caused the demise of Mars, and because of the demise of Mars, they were forced to stabilize the Earth that back then had no moon, and therefore without a moon, it circled much faster. The weather is completely unpredictable and terrible, so they had to slow down the Earth. What better thing to do that give it a moon? So we are the fifth planet with the fifth moon in terms of size. That's another coincidence in terms of our solar system. So I think that if we look at Sidonia, we'll find the basis of these angles that you are showing me. I think we'll find it again if you look at the maps of Sidonia and you look at the 6 size pyramid. I'm not sure if it's 5 or 6 sides.
Five-sided pyramid.
Okay, you'll find the same kind of coding in the angles and the geometries. So I think the stories, if you want to go through the route of higher people than us, or perhaps our past were much advanced, then I would put the start there instead of here on Earth. The contact, I mean.
Well, it would be nice, but unfortunately they've not sent any of their probes to Sidonia, so we don't know.
No.
They've studiously avoided the place for some strange reason, but it would be my favorite
place to go.
Yeah, it was the obvious place to go to, isn't it? I mean, there's some very interesting geology there. So if you're interested in geology, why don't you send a probe
it's like to looking at Earth and saying, where is the best place for us to look for life? Let's go to the middle of the Sahara.
Yes, that's right.
In the middle. Let's look for or the desert of Arizona or the steppes of Mongolia.
Yes.
Let's look in there for life. So that's what have they done in Mars.
Yeah.
Well, the Enuma Elish really kind of symbolically, discusses that whole early celestial origin of our local cosmos, and pretty clearly, if you cut past the what's being symbolically stated, it's a pretty scientific 8,000-year-old account of what formed our local cosmos.
Sure.
So they had that information from somewhere. And certainly you couldn't have been on the planet to get that information if it didn't exist at the time. So it's a fascinating train of thought that really, when you follow it enough, kind of really only leads that one direction.
Look, I don't believe that, if following Ralph's thoughts here, I don't believe that man is a natural thing.
Right, exactly.
So
Well, that's exactly what the
if
Enuma
man is
said.
not a
You were
natural
made of the
thing,
clay of the
yeah,
earth, with the spittle of the goddess, you know?
if man is not a natural element, because we are the only creature on earth that doesn't seem to belong to nature, nor is
Yeah.
prepared to live in nature as any other animal. We don't find any signs of macroevolution, except a few exceptions in certain specific animals
Yeah.
that are not replicated in anywhere else. And we see that we have a constant repetition of the same idea of two opposing forces. One on the good side that is in minor in numbers but higher in wisdom, and a larger side that most consider the reptilian side, or whatever they want to call it, that has larger numbers but are more brutes in essence. So what I see is the repetition of the story of God and Satan. There is the Satan element here, or the Morgoth in terms of Lord of the Rings, or many other names that you could fetch on along mythology, is the guy that wants to create his own world, to do the same that the main guy did. And so he creates something on his image, and that thing is about to serve him, and that thing is man. So he goes to the nature. You see, what is the most sophisticated animal that we can mix with our essence and create an intelligent being that serves us? So they go to bonobos, or they go to some sort of what they call almost something that isn't an homo. It's just a monkey with the shoulders all put all the way up, so it doesn't look a monkey. And they create men to serve them. But then the cycle of ages, they reach the point when there is no long, you don't see the gods ruling us. You see that gods pass that charge to the sons of the gods that we see, for instance, in Egypt. They are no longer divine, they are human, but they are considered to be the sons of gods, and that's the transition of power. And then that ceases, and we get to the world that we see today, where those few that control the masses are no longer seen anywhere. We don't recognize them apart from big names like Beckrock or
you're back to 2001: A Space Odyssey, basically.
Yes,
We're
yes.
talking about the same things.
Well, the Popol Vuh says that exactly. That, you know, multiple attempts were made off of the clay of the earth, or the mud of the earth, and that finally one worked out. So I mean, it's interesting how many holy books reference exactly that.
And you see two cultures that I call the teachers and the slavers. You see constructions like you see in Thailand, like not Taj Mahal, which the one with the big moat, Angkor Wat. You see Angkor Wat that needs a lot of people, so they create systems that can irrigate large fields to feed all those people. And then you see small sites like Machu Picchu that the archaeological record shows us there was no hierarchy. Everyone was the same. You find this difference where everyone gets the same education, everyone gets the same kind of life, everyone gets the same thing to eat or to drink. And then you see these opposites. That's why I call them the teachers and the slavers. And perhaps some of them has teach us to be more and more independent, more and more aware of certain technologies, and the other ones that one, obviously, it's like the elves in Lord of the Rings, they call it the long defeat. So they keep fighting back, but they keep losing terrain to the slavers, and that's how we went up today.
Anyway, I must go.
Yes, so sorry for keep you that long.
That's all right. We've done 3 hours, which is quite good. So that'll give you some.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Ralph.
Oh, my pleasure.
Before you go, is there anything you want to plug in? Your website, your books, your ex?
I keep forgetting to do that. I'm not a very good salesman. Yes, the books we've been looking at is K2. Let's see if I've got some pictures at the top here. Yeah, we've got Thoth, Architect of the Universe. That was the first book which looked at the pyramids and the henges. And then K2, that was the one that started looking at K2, obviously. So that was the sequel. The rest of the books I've got, the most interesting, I suppose, is Jesus, the King of Edessa. That's part of the King Jesus trilogy. which says that Jesus was a real king, not a pretend king. So I'm saying that I found him in the historical record. All of this is available on what's best. Probably my X site, Twitter site, which is at Ralph Elis, but Ralph spelt with an F. Ralph Elis on Twitter X, and I've got a website that's not very active anymore, but it has all the books on it, which is edfu-books.com. edfu-books.com. So you can get the information there. So yeah, join me on X. I post quite a lot on X with most of my books and material and so on. So you can always team up there and have a word.
And if you'll be kind enough to send me those links, I will post them in the description of the video.
Sure,
so people can find them there. It's easier for them just to click and go and see your material or your account on X.
Yes.
So
yes, all of the books are mostly Amazon. So the paperbacks are on Amazon, or you can get the Kindle downloads.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Well, Ralph,
lovely.
Don't go away, but I just want to say thank you very much. Cody, any last words?
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Ralph, for the incredible body of work you've contributed to all these subjects over the years, and for everything you continue to do every day, and for having this conversation with us. It was a true pleasure.
So,
thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And so to all of you, a very fond farewell. Thank you.